Alexander Downer was our longest-serving Foreign Minister and, in my opinion, Australia's best in generations and much better than all his successors, which include Kevin Rudd and Julie Bishop. But now he's been dragged into a conspiracy theory. 3 years ago, he met a Foreign Affairs advisor in Donald Trump's campaign, George Papadopoulos, in a London bar. Downer had been brought along to that meeting by an official from our High Commission in London. And Papadopoulos told Downer that he believed the Russians had information on Hillary Clinton that they'd dump to embarrass her in her campaign against Donald Trump. And Downer alerted our Department of Foreign Affairs in a memo. They alerted the United States, and this, of course, helped to push along the FBI investigation to whether Donald Trump was colluding with Russia to steal the election. As we since found out, the Mueller report has since said that he wasn't. In any event, Papadopoulos 8 months ago said Downer had acted suspiciously.
It was done under extremely suspicious circumstances.
You were suspicious? You thought you were being recorded?
I was so suspicious that I actually notified the FBI when I was talking to them that I thought that Downer was recording me with his phone illegally.
But since then, Donald Trump's Attorney General has accused the FBI of having itself spied on the Trump campaign. And Papadopoulos now claims Downer is so terrified that the world will now see that he was a wannabe spy, FBI spy, in fact, who I caught, he says, right away. Yep, well, we'll see. Joining me is Alexander Downer. Alexander Downer, it's terrific to catch up with you again. Did the FBI or anyone working for the FBI or our own intelligence service, anyone connected with an intelligence service, ask you to meet Papadopoulos?
Of course not. Somebody who is a former foreign minister in the Australian High Commissioner or ambassador in London is hardly going to be somebody who is used by intelligence services to collect information. That would never happen. That simply isn't how those kind of operations work. So the whole thing is, anybody who knows anything about government knows the whole thing is completely absurd.
But your memo to the Department of Foreign Affairs, of course, did help have that whole FBI investigation into whether there was a collusion with between Trump and Russia. Looking back now, do you believe that there was such a collusion with Russia to leak, say, Hillary Clinton's stolen emails?
No. There was no suggestion from Papadopoulos, nor in the record of the meeting that we sent back to Canberra. There was no suggestion that there was collusion between Donald Trump or Donald Trump's campaign and the Russians. All we did was report what Papadopoulos said, and that was that he thought the Russians might release information that could be damaging to Hillary Clinton's campaign at some stage before the election. Now, he didn't have to tell me that. I didn't go to the meeting thinking he was going to even mention Russia in a context like the election campaign. I had no idea what he would say. He chose to say that to me, and he apparently says he said it also to the Greek foreign minister a week or two later. I have no idea why he was blabbering this, but if you say that sort of thing to somebody who is part of the Five Eyes intelligence community, I mean, I would regard myself as a warrior for the Western Alliance. If it had drawn to my attention that the Russians might be hacking into the campaigns of major candidates in Western elections and then using that information to try to influence the outcome of those elections, that would really worry me. I mean, Russia is not a friendly power when it comes to Western interests, and if they're hacking into our elections, that's something we should try to stop. I don't know why he told me this, but he did, and we reported it, and the rest is history. But there's no defence for him saying it's some sort of weird conspiracy. I mean, it's what he told me.
Well, one reason he might have told you was that the meeting was in a bar. Did you tape him at the time?
No, the meeting. Well, yes, the meeting was in the Kensington Wine Bar, but it was only for an hour. and it was at 6 o'clock in the evening. So it was certainly not, as the New York Times claimed, an alcohol-fuelled evening. There were three of us, and we, so I have a witness, we had a gin and tonic. And no recording was made. I mean, a diplomat would not make a recording. That is not the modus operandi of diplomats. It certainly wouldn't have made a recording. Whether I played with my phone or not, I could have done. I could have been looking at text messages, or I could have, I mean, mea culpa here. Does happen.
Do you agree? I think I heard you say that you don't believe that there was collusion between Donald Trump and Russia. But do you agree that there was spying on the Trump campaign by the FBI?
I wouldn't imagine so, no. The FBI's, it's not quite, it's like the Australian Federal Police. It's not a spy agency. That's sort of confusing the FBI with the CIA. I mean, but why would the FBI be spying on any campaign? I mean, it seems... It seems so improbable, doesn't it? I mean...
well, I don't know, because they did send... The FBI did leak...
I don't know.
Well, the FBI did leak to the New York Times. The FBI did leak to the New York Times, and they sent a cloaked investigator to follow up your meeting with Papadopoulos. So who knows what that's about? But listen, can I ask you?
And who knows who leaked too? You never really know the answer to that, do you? You know who leaked these things? I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure we're overly fussed about it. Trump won the election. The Russians might have or might not have wanted Trump to win the election. I'm sure they did. But at that stage, Trump wasn't even the candidate, let alone for the Republicans. He hadn't even won the nomination. So, you know, I mean, this has all become out of context.
Yeah, but talking about Donald Trump, what do you make of his impact on foreign policy? We've now got a trade war with China. He's been negotiating with the North Korean dictator. Sending an Air Force task carrier group to confront Iran right now. Looking at it in the whole, what do you make of it all?
Well, I think the worst thing about Donald Trump is all the tweeting and the language he uses from time to time, which appeals to his base. But in that respect, he's the kind of Paul Keating of American politics. But in terms of policy, he certainly isn't. I think in terms of foreign policy, he's strengthened America's hand very substantially. He's investing heavily in the American defence forces. I think his strategy on North Korea has been worth a try. It's not game over yet. We'll see how that pans out over time. I mean, I think more broadly, he's put America very substantially back on the map. He has, in his personal style, alienated a number of Western leaders in varying degrees. They're quite critical of him, particularly behind his back. But in terms of America's foreign policy, in terms, if you like, of what he's done, then you mentioned the China trade issue. His position is quite clear. I mean, he says to the Chinese, we let your goods and services into the American market much more readily than you let us into the Chinese market. Could you please open up your market more for us to ensure there's appropriate reciprocity, or we'll start closing off our market to you? So it's a tough way to negotiate, but we'll see what comes out of it. We'll see how that ends up. But I think everyone feels China could open up its markets more to the outside world than is currently the case.
Now, you had a little dig there at Paul Keating. Obviously, the former Labor Prime Minister has just called for the sacking of the heads of our intelligence services for being too suspicious of China. Now, I should acknowledge you've been on the board of China's huge Huawei communications company, but is Keating right?
Oh, and he referred to them as nutters, the heads of our intelligence agencies. I mean, and remember, Trump was out there attacking the American intelligence agencies at some stage when he first came to office. And we've talked a little bit about some of that tension that's existed. This is ridiculous. The Australian intelligence agencies just provide impartial information to the government. They don't very often provide advice. They provide information. Information on which different government departments and ultimately ministers in the cabinet can make decisions. I mean, to suggest that they should be politicising the information they provide. I mean, if there is an issue, for example, of China hacking into our communication systems, or at least trying to hack into our communication systems, it might be a good idea for our intelligence agencies to tell our ministers and Prime Minister that that's happening. And they're not nutters for doing so. So I think that it reminded me, when I heard Paul Keating say this, first of all, it rather specifically reminded me of Donald Trump's attack on the American intelligence agencies, but calling the heads of our intelligence agencies, who are professional public servants of long-standing nutters, well, it's rather Trump-esque. So when I say that Paul Keating in some ways reminds me of Donald Trump, it seems to annoy a lot of the supporters of Paul Keating.
Well, you're annoying me as a supporter of Donald Trump. But anyway, turning to the election campaign, Alexander Downer, what do you make of the way the Liberals are campaigning?
I think they're doing a good job. You know, they came off a low base. They were well behind at the beginning of the campaign. And I think Scott Morrison has proved to be the best Liberal campaigner that the party's produced since John Howard. He's always on message. He's a strong campaigner, very much on top of the detail, which is slightly encouraging if you have a Prime Minister who understands the detail. Always a little disappointing when the Prime Minister, or sometimes at the moment the opposition leader, can't quite grasp the detail and has to look at and shuffle around notes to try to find out what the facts are, and can't tell you how much his climate change policies are going to cost. Scott Morrison is right on the detail. And I think that's impressive. But, you know, they started well behind. They've got a lot of ground to make up.
Oh, they have, and they started well behind in part because of, or large part, because of Malcolm Turnbull. But speaking of Turnbull, his sabotaging of the Liberals, and particularly the sabotaging by his son, Alex, you know, again, was it today he was tweeting about global warming. Do you think, A, does it surprise you from a man like him, the sabotaging of the party he led until only last year, and should he be expelled from the party?
Look, I'm not getting into that. I think we need to work our way through the election campaign and hope that people who are Liberals, whether they are members of Parliament or whether they were members of Parliament like me, or whether they're just branch members somewhere within the Australian community, just need to all pull together now, because we've only got 10 days to go. And we just have to hope that Scott Morrison can get the show across the line. And it's not going to be helped by having an argument about Malcolm Turnbull or Tony Abbott or all of this. I mean, best not to dredge all that up. And, I mean, people can say what they like after the election, but I think now it's the time to focus on the core messages of the election.
No, in that case, I won't ask you about Marise Payne either, who's taken over as a foreign minister. You used to use it to say things. She uses it to complete a vow of silence, which is quite bizarre. The election campaign has turned very nasty again for your daughter, Georgina, who is campaigning the seat of Mayo against MP Rebecca Sharkey. Now, one of Sharkey's campaign volunteers has been charged with stalking your daughter, which he denies. How distressing is this for you? Well,
you know, when your own child is involved with politics, you've got to be very careful what you say. So I would only make, because you can imagine how biased I am towards my own children. I have 4 of them, and I love them all equally and very much. So trust me, I'm always on their side, always, whatever they want to do. But I think more broadly, we have seen not so much a deterioration in the quality of and the tone of the debate between the leaders. I think the nadir of that was when Paul Keating was the Prime Minister. But we have seen a deterioration in the behaviour of what you might generally call activists in the community. I mean, if you have a look at social media, the language that is used, the abuse, it's just a cacophony of foul language, the most dreadful comments made. I mean, I just find it extraordinary that people could descend to such depths. You sometimes on the campaign trail run into people who you know have said really vile things on social media, and when you talk to them, they're quite civil. In other words, they would never say such things to someone's face. And I really think it isn't just the political leaders, and Morrison and Shorten have on the whole been pretty polite to each other through the election campaign. They've just debated the issues. But I really think the activists have to tone it down a bit. Some of the language and behaviour is just disgraceful.
Oh, you're quite correct, and you're correct too, I think, about the main leaders, although I perhaps wouldn't extend your comments to Richard Di Natale of the Greens. Alexander Downer, it's been a real pleasure catching up with you again. Thank you very much for your time.
It's a pleasure, Andrew.